Hello, and welcome back to the Distillery. I'm your host, Harry Lee Shanglun. Just before we get into today's episode, I'd like to point out that today in Australia, it is the last day of Reconciliation Week, also known as Mabo Day. And that's because Eddie Mabo fought for the right to not recognize Australia as terra nullius, or this kind of unpopulated land. His love for his home, culture, and country has led to a huge amount of change culturally and politically. I acknowledge that this series is being produced on the land of the people of the Kulin Nation, and that sovereignty was never ceded. I pay respects to elders past and present. Today we have special guests William Hammersla and Ruen May Mackenzie. Hi, Will. Hi, May. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm sad that I'm not climbing.
Understandable.
William and May are both routesetters, which means that for those that don't do bouldering, you create problems for climbers. Can you explain what you do?
Yeah, so essentially we attach plastic to walls and then people try and get from point A to point B as efficiently as possible.
And having tried that, it's like a hard thing. It's not an easy thing. What prevents you from just putting up like one hold here, a hold super far out of the way over there, and calling it a day? Like, what's the task of route setting actually about? Is it just making it as difficult as possible, or is there something else at play?
Well, I'll jump in for this one. I guess being like a route setting manager, it's my job to help my team create a plan. So like a plan of difficulty and styles, and there's lots of different things that we try to think about to give our climbers a really enjoyable experience and a diverse experience of lots of different things. So you usually have a design brief, I guess is the best way to think about it, of key things that we want to try and create so that, we have lots of interesting things lots of problems for people to solve.
Right. And so with that context where you're trying to create interesting problems, how did both of you actually get into that position of creating problems rather than solving it like most climbers are doing?
I was actually approached while I was climbing at a gym to come and do a day of setting by one of the head routesetters for that facility.
That's awesome. And Will?
Similar thing for me as well. I was approached by the owner of the gym just to have some free climbing in exchange for route setting, which at the time sounded like two amazing things. I wasn't sure how it was a question. So yeah, it was really through like connections and friends, I think, back then.
Right. So it's not an industry that I can go and do a university course in?
Not yet.
Unfortunately not.
Not yet. But one day.
Yeah, one day, hopefully. Yeah.
Interesting. And Will, you mentioned that you actually got offered by this person to do route setting in exchange for free climbing. Is route setting something that is done in exchange for goods and services? Is it a paid position?
I mean, I think it's still a really growing industry. I feel very lucky that I've managed to find a career out of this, amazing activity I get to do. And I started route setting nearly a decade ago. And when I started, it was free climbing, and you get to do some route setting. So it's just this like, I don't know, it sounds great. Definitely male dominated. And over the past probably only really 5 years, I think that there's been more and more opportunities for people to become involved in a professional sense in the world of route setting.
And just picking up on something you said, it was a very male-dominated industry. Is that still the case, May? I know you've written that you are part of a small but strong group of women in climbing.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely a push and a movement towards more inclusivity in route setting, especially from what I've noticed in the past year. But from when I first started out, I was the only female setting in 2 of the gyms that I was involved in to begin with. And I don't know, it's a little interesting to talk about because it's not overt things that stop women from coming in and setting. It's little things like I was never allowed to use the drill and I never got to pick the hold steps. So it's like really subtle things. So it's a pretty interesting issue to talk about, but it's definitely something that's changing, which is exciting to see.
Wait, so you weren't allowed to hold the drill, as in someone told you, like, no drill for you?
Yeah, I wasn't trusted to know how to use it.
Wow, that's messed up. And how are things changing, and what kind of initiatives are there now to change the, I guess, like, perspective and representation of gender in climbing?
I think because climbing is such a diverse sport, when there isn't inclusivity, it's noticed. So I feel like the movement is more social than industry driven, if that makes sense. It's sort of like a standard. If you don't see it, then that's an issue, which is exciting to see. I definitely feel like it's people driven.
That's nice. So you're saying like diversity in this sport should be the norm and is noticed when it's not reflecting like what we should be seeing?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
That's really cool. Both of you set at this amazing climbing gym called Urban Climb, and specifically the Collingwood branch, which is also where I learned how to climb. May, you actually did my safety induction.
I remember it well.
It was so awesome. And I know, like, I certainly got hooked into it. What is it about climbing that is so appealing?
I have come across this question so many times, and I think my answer changes like every single time. Mainly for me, it's almost become a lifestyle and a habit to go to the climbing gym. It's certainly a place that I feel most comfortable, and it gives me so many things in my life. There's the social aspect, there's strength, exercise. It helps my mental health. It's my job now, so I also have that link to it as a career. But I honestly don't think there's any part of my life that isn't bettered by climbing.
It's a strong endorsement. How about you, Will?
It definitely started off with mental health. I think when May mentioned that, I definitely feel a link there for me. And I've always found it's an opportunity for us to be children again. You know, everyone's like, we're all so focused on growing up and like doing appropriate things with money and making good life choices. And it's this giant adult playground. It's this giant adult playground that we all get to go and be children and be ourselves in. And I really love that aspect of it as well, I think.
So I'm interested here in something you're alluding to, which is that climbing is playful, and there is something that we associate with childhoodness, or like, you know, as a kid, we're not afraid to just try and climb the tree. I was afraid to climb the tree because I was a very risk-averse kid, but apparently for most climbers, love to climb trees. And then on the other side of it, we've, you know, spoken with like Grace Crowley, who's a competitive climber, and thought about the psychology of competition climbing as a sport, which is very intense, even as it is also socially inclusive. So how do you, as route setters, cater for these two contrasting perspectives of the same activity? One which is casual, social, about mental health, about freedom of expression, about playfulness and childlikeness, and one which is competitive, very like oriented towards winning, trying to do the best that you can, tuning your body to become this perfect machine.
You want to take that one,
Who
Will?
wants to go first? I guess, I mean, when I think about, to be honest, I think when I think about those two different elements, I actually think about the route setting really differently. I mean, I've spent a lot of time setting commercially, so for places like Urban, and then also a lot of time setting for competitions. And I guess the energy, the emotion that I try and bring into what I'm creating is very different. The best way I've ever heard it described was actually by a Routesetter in Japan, when they talked about commercial settings. So when you're setting for I guess regular clientele, it's teaching, like it's teaching and learning. And the way that they described competition is cutting. It's the energy, the ideas that you have are much more aggressive when you're creating, I think, for competition climbing. And it's so interesting that you can be so, that emotion can be drawn out so much in climbing. Like fear is another big one. When you're climbing slabs or vertical walls and it's all balancy, you have this fear that happens. And I think that like competition setting, we draw on a lot of those emotions when we set. Whereas with, I think, commercial setting, there's more teaching element, I think. But yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah,
Does
just
that answer your
to
question? I don't know.
yeah, it does. Sorry, I was giving space to like think for myself, but also wondering if like May, you've experienced in your own setting a difference.
I actually have never set for a competition before, so I've only ever done a commercial setting. I can imagine it would be a stricter, sort of more structured day of setting for competitions. There's definitely something you need to get out of it. So you need to have that breakup of the athletes and like those clear lines of tops. And of course, like there's, for anyone who hasn't seen competition climbing in bouldering, there's often a start, like a middle point and then a top, and they are all ranked differently for points. So that's something you would have to think about as well in the setting. But definitely for commercial setting, it's all about like teaching and creativity. So I feel like it's a lot freer in the design.
Is that true across all the grades? Like if you're setting in urban climb, it's blue, but you might call it, in using the V system, like a low difficulty climb versus something like a black climb, which is really more difficult. Does it change the way that you think about it?
It changes in that you have a little more freedom with the higher grades to explore different movements and kind of make it more experimental, I guess. But I think you still have the same sort of excitement and teaching opportunities through all the color ranges. Like you never stop learning.
So just to summarize what both of you kind of said, it sounds like in commercial setting, it's about teaching. And you are introducing moves, you are getting to experiment, particularly at the higher range of the difficulty scale. But it's being very like approachable, and it's about inviting the I'm going to use the word player here, but that's because I'm a game designer, the climber, to learn something dialogically. And then in competitions, it sounds like, particularly when you're playing with that emotion like fear that you're mentioning, Will, you're highlighting an experience. You're really crafting something. I mean, I like the cutting idea, but you do get to push all the way in and lean into that. That's so cool. So I guess another question I have then is, as you approach these from a design and from a technical perspective, saying, I want to highlight this emotion or want to teach this idea, do you then see route setting as an art? Like what kind of, and if so, what kind of things are you trying to express with that art? Or is it more of a design field where you're trying to like solve a problem in creating one?
Who goes first?
For me, I guess when I'm approaching a boulder, functionality always goes before like an aesthetic, I guess. So long as the movement is sort of engaging, fun, teaching, that's the most important thing. But there is definitely an aesthetic that you kind of strive for. I mean, you want to make something that someone goes to, is drawn to, wants to go back to, is visually like stunning. You know, if you see a boring boulder, you're like, nah, I'm going to go climb that thing that's like taking up half the wall and looks like it's got flowers coming out of it, sort of thing.
Or urban climb, a literal flower coming out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it's always secondary to make things look visually appealing, or the art side of it has never really come as naturally to me, but it is definitely important and has value for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. We've there's a really famous route setting teacher called Tonde, currently resides in the US, and they came across and provided this workshop with us a few years ago, and talked a lot about the difference, I guess, between art and design, and the idea that art is almost like you have no boundaries, I guess, whereas design, the boundaries are really important. And I love this idea that May was talking about, is like the functionality. And for me, it's like the most important part of the boulder is when people interact with it, right? Like, how does somebody interact with what you've put on the wall? Because until that happens, it is art. It's just installation art. It's some stuff screwed onto the wall, right? And so until people interact with it, it's not really a boulder yet. And that's so exciting, like watching people interact with this thing that you've built with the group, because we try to work as a team as much as possible. It's just like, it's thrilling, because how are they going to solve the problem you've created? And I think that that's where that design element is so important to think about. Yeah.
I really love boulders are just installation art until someone climbs them. That's how I'm going to walk into the gym after months of not climbing because of COVID-19 and just go, God, this is a great gallery.
Yeah. That's all it is at the moment. That's all it is. Yeah. It's just this gallery at the moment. It's terrible. I hate it.
Yeah. You're not a modern artist. You're a Routesetter. Like
yeah.
People have to climb this. I do notice that there's like a whole community. I mean, not just at Urban Climb, but other climbing gyms, and that climbs are discussed and revered and torn apart. And like I'm part of a group chat with dozens of people. Sometimes when there's a new set, people will say, "Can someone take pictures? I want to armchair send." And sending is means to like try to solve a problem. So like, we'll dutifully take pictures, and people will start to predict how they're going to move on the wall. So I think I understand what you mean by like, it's about what happens when people climb, and that mirrors my understanding as a game designer, which is like, it's about how people experience the game, and then people will always surprise you. So with that in mind, I would love to ask, can you take us through the process from start to finish of setting? Like, how does it begin? How does it happen? What are the problems that occur in between? What's like the arc of starting and finishing with timestamps?
What do you want me to set up the day, May? And then you can say how you...
Yeah, that's
so I
fun.
can talk about maybe some... Yeah, okay. Because I come at it from a very different angle, I think, to May, right? So I organize what's potentially going to happen on the day. So we record everything that we put on the wall, and we try to log information about the boulders that are up. So it'd be like the color of the climb, which tells you what difficulty bracket it tends to sit in, and then some like key elements about it. So we usually look at three things. One is risk, one is intensity, and one is complexity. So risk is more, instead of it being like dangerous, risk is more about like how low percentage or how hard is it to do that movement when you want to, I guess, right? So a dyno when you're jumping, or when you're trying to stand on something that's really slippery, like these are usually high risk moves. And then we have intensity, which is obviously how hard you have to hold on and how hard you have to pull. And then complexity, which is like how hard it is to solve that problem, like how much of a puzzle is that. So we log all of this information, and what I would do is that I would look at the area that we're going to set, and then I'd look at where some of the gaps are within the facility. So what do we need more of in the red or the black circuit? Do we need a little more risk? Do we need a little more intensity or a little more complexity? And how can I come up with a design brief so that my route setters can come in and get their design brief and then bring their flavor to what's being put on the wall. So that's usually the first thing I do the day before, and then come up with a design brief. And then the morning of, we will come in, the walls will get stripped. So we take all the holes down, they get cleaned. I present the design brief to the route setters, and then I'll hand over to May.
Yeah. So I think we start at, you said you wanted timestamps. I believe we start at 9 most mornings. We'll get our brief, and depending on what that is, we'll often discuss who would like to take what boulder and that kind of thing. Then often I'll have a look at the wall profile for a little bit, just to see if I can match a section of the wall that will best fit the RIC that I've given, so the risk, intensity and complexity. And then I'll head into the storage room to check out what volumes and holds we have available for the day. And again, trying to assess kind of what will best fit my briefing. So I'll take my holds, go to the wall, and this is like the hardest bit for me to describe. I have ideas usually already about the wall that I want, just like moves that I like. I'll let the holds kind of take me in the direction that I feel is most natural to the wall shape and how much space I have on there. I also sometimes have like backlogs on Instagram of videos that I've seen, so I might try and recreate something, which is often fun as well. Or, I mean, very occasionally I'll take something from like a project outside that I've climbed and I want to try and recreate inside the gym. And then, so I'll put up sort of a template. I normally set from ground up. Some people like to set from like their crux move, which is essentially the hardest move on the boulder. But I usually like to start with just hand sequencing from the ground up. I often won't add feet until last minute, just because I find that bit the most challenging. And then once we've got up a template, we'll often break or see if anyone needs any help with any of their ideas and wants to discuss anything. And then that's usually like 10:30ish. You'll have enough time, or even 11, to get the boulders up. And then we'll do our first testing, which is where we go around, try each of the boulders, see what works, see what didn't quite fit, see if it matches the briefing well, or if anyone's having trouble with an idea, we might project that workshop that move and see if we can get it to sort of fit the idea that they had in mind. And then once we've done that, it's usually around time for lunch. So we'll have our break, come back, make those tweaks, and then climb again. And that's usually like, I don't know, 2 o'clock. Try the climbs again, and then hopefully by then we're ready to like set screw and pack up.
And so you're constantly testing from very early on in the process, right? You're the actual moment of generating the idea and kind of creating that initial framework, which will then take up the rest of the day's activity, happens in the first hour and a half, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really quick. Yeah.
Huh. And you said that it was hard to describe, but maybe that's the process I would just zoom in on a little bit. You said you were inspired by the holds and the wall profile.
Yeah.
What does that mean or look like?
So I guess it would depend on like the RIC and the grade that I was on. So say you've got something like in our gym it's called the Roufio, which is a really steep roof profile. If you've been given the charge of setting a purple on that wall, which is low intensity, medium complexity, medium risk, the holds that I'm using are going to be able to tell me how hard that's going to be. So if I have holds that are like teeny mini crimps that are only, like half your fingers, you're obviously not going to fit that briefing very well. So you're going to have to pick something that's big. You can wrap your hands in it. You're going to have to use kind of volumes that'll build out the wall a little bit to lower that intensity so it's not as steep. So those are the kind of things that tell me what to set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good articulation of it. And I like that it has parallels, I think, with other creative disciplines, that your tools are informing a lot of your decision-making processes, like they're one and the same in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
That's so cool. And so, okay, at 2 o'clock, you're finished testing and you're like looked over your boulders, you're happy with the tweaks. Does it just open and then you immediately like see someone ruin your design, or what happens after that?
To be honest, I don't feel like it's possible to ruin a boulder.
Ooh.
Unpopular opinion maybe, but I think watching someone find an alternate route, like a way to get up your boulder, is half the fun. You know, like that they've come up with a way that you never even thought of to try your climb is just inspiring.
That's really great. I like that perspective.
Plus, like, I think it's always important to remember, and I try to remind everybody that we're setting problems, we're not setting solutions. So you're giving somebody the opportunity to solve your boulder however works for them. Whether they want to pull on that foothold and that brings them joy, you know, that's part of the fun, right? I wouldn't do it myself, but yeah.
But I mean, if it sparks joy, keep it, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. Yeah. You know, I've worked in some gyms with some people where, you know, some of the Routesetters were like, oh man, there was like this devoted Instagram page to people breaking this Routesetter's boulders, like breaking. And
but like, wait, when you said breaking, not with a sledgehammer, right?
Yeah, not with a no. So like they wouldn't climb it the way that this Routesetter had intended it. And they were just so upset. I was like, oh, you know, everyone just breaks my boulders and they're making fun of me. I'm like, people, but it was like quite a following. They loved it. These people loved it. I'm like, you're bringing these people joy, regardless of whether they do it because, you know, they are like, they love the boulder. I mean, they love the boulder because they enjoy problem solving it a different way. Like that's it. You've done your job. Like, yeah.
I think routesetting, routesetting sits at this amazing intersection of you're having a dialogue with your players, with your climbers, and you're not always in control. The way that they act can itself be a type of like critique or revelation. But it is a two-way conversation that occurs, right? Like you set something for them and then they answer with their bodies. I really love the way that both of you approach routesetting. It's been such a wonderful glimpse into the life of somebody who thinks very carefully about creating experiences for other humans, which I think is a very empathetic art and design craft. So just incredibly cool. Thank you both so much for talking about your discipline and your passion.
Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome.
It was fun.
Yeah.
We have like a minute left, so I'm just going to ask one question, which is, what are you most looking forward to after this pandemic when people are allowed to climb again?
I have two things. Yeah, one thing is seeing everyone and climbing with everyone again. I have been missing that so much. The second thing is actually going to the movies.
Yeah,
and the movie theaters.
I haven't, like, I'm not a movie buff, but I will go and watch a movie as soon as it's available. Yeah, I think you're right.
Definitely.
And Will, you said
definitely second that. Oh, but people, yeah, just having people in the gym. Can't wait.
Amazing. Oh, thank you both once again. It's great to chat with you, and I can't wait to see you and climb all of your amazing creations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Take care. You are watching The Distillery. I'm your host, Harry Lee Shanglun, and thank you for your patience as I deal with immense lag because my Wi-Fi doesn't exist. You can check out previous episodes on our website, distillery.site, and you can also see our future guests. You can follow along on Instagram at distillery.site and on Twitter at distillery site. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back with a brand new episode tomorrow evening. Take care, everyone.